Parents refused to babysit my son while I was in the hospital, calling him a burden, and I couldn't believe it. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I'm Laura Benson, a single mom to my 3-year-old son Ethan. One night, I was rushed to the hospital with a severe abdominal pain that turned out to be an emergency appendectomy. The pain was unbearable, and all I could think about was who would take care of Ethan while I was in surgery. My first thought was my parents. I dialed their number, hoping they would help, but what I heard left me in shock. My mom, Martha, laughed and said, "We have our own lives, Laura. Ethan is more trouble than he's worth." My dad, Richard, agreed, calling him a burden and suggesting I figure it out on my own. I couldn't believe my ears. The people I had always trusted to be there for me and my son had turned their backs in the worst moment of my life. As I lay in the hospital bed, tears filled my eyes, and I remembered all the times I had helped them, babysat my younger cousins, supported family events, and never asked for much in return. And now, in my hour of need, they couldn't even show basic care. I felt betrayed and completely alone. When I got out of surgery, I realized I couldn't rely on them anymore. I called my sister, Hannah, hoping for some support, but she was too busy to help, leaving me to face the reality that my family did not value me or Ethan. That night, while Ethan slept in the care of a neighbor who kindly stepped in, I made a promise to myself. I would never put my son or myself in a position where we depended on people who didn't care. I started documenting the ways my parents had neglected and mocked me over the years, using it as a reminder to protect Ethan and myself. I focused on my career, asked for a promotion, and moved us into a safer neighborhood where we could thrive without interference. Every step forward felt like a small revenge against their selfishness, proving that we didn't need their approval or support. Months later, I invited them to Ethan's school recital, pretending it was a casual visit. They mocked him and me quietly, but I calmly confronted them about how they had treated us. Watching their shocked faces, as I spoke with composure, was empowering. I realized my revenge didn't need to be dramatic. My independence and Ethan's happiness were in. I focused on building a life filled with love, security, and opportunities for my son, knowing that true family is not about blood, but about those who show up when it matters. Martha and Richard could no longer hurt us, and that knowledge gave me peace I had never felt before. As I rested in the hospital bed, recovering and groggy from the anesthesia, my mind kept drifting back to my childhood. I remembered the countless times I stayed late to babysit my younger cousins while my parents attended events or ran errands. I was always there, helping wherever I could, often putting their needs above my own. I had thought that when the roles reversed, they would be there for me, especially with Ethan depending on me as a single mom. I pictured Ethan at home, probably confused and scared, and the image made my chest tighten. The thought of him sitting alone, waiting for someone who would never come, was unbearable. It was not just disappointment, it was a deep, aching betrayal. I had trusted them to care for him, believing family meant support and love, but their words echoed in my head. He's a burden. How could they say that about my son, the one little person in my life I would do anything for? I thought about all the holidays I had helped organize, the meals I had prepared for extended family gathering, and the sacrifices I had made without complaint. Every memory now felt heavy, tainted by the realization that their care and guidance had limits, and when it truly mattered, they were absent. It hurt more than I could express. As the hospital machines beeped softly around me, I felt a mixture of sorrow and determination. I couldn't change their past neglect, but I could protect Ethan and myself moving forward. Their refusal to help had shattered my illusions of unconditional family support, but it also planted a seed of resolve. I promised myself that no matter what, Ethan would always be safe, loved, and supported, even if it meant keeping my distance from those who should have been there. Lying there, imagining Ethan's small face and trusting eyes, I realized this was a turning point. Their absence wasn't just a moment of failure, it was a lesson. It made me understand that true care comes from actions, not words or blood ties. The sting of betrayal was sharp, but it also strengthened me. I vowed that Ethan would never feel alone or unwanted, and I would make sure that the people who mattered most in our lives were those who truly deserved to be there. After a few days at home, still recovering, I reached out to my sister, Hannah, hoping for even a small bit of support. I figured she lived close by and could help with Ethan for a few hours, just enough for me to rest. But her response stunned me. "I'm really busy, Laura. You'll have to handle it yourself," she said casually, as if Ethan's needs were unimportant. I froze, staring at the phone, feeling a hollow ache spread through me. It hit me then that my family didn't truly see the challenges I faced every day. Being a single mom wasn't easy, and I had counted on them to step up when it mattered most. Instead, They dismissed my struggles and treated my son like an inconvenience. The anger bubbled up inside me, sharp and unrelenting, mixed with deep disappointment that the people I trusted most could be so indifferent. I looked at Ethan playing on the living room floor, his small hands clutching his toy car, and felt both sadness and resolve. I realized I couldn't rely on anyone who didn't value us. The people who should have supported me, the ones I thought were family, had made it clear they didn't care. It was a harsh awakening, but one I needed. As I watched him laugh quietly to himself, a thought took hold in my mind. If they see Ethan as a burden, maybe it's time I stop seeing them as family. The words echoed inside me like a mantra, fueling a quiet determination. I wouldn't allow their coldness to affect our lives. From that moment on, I made a silent promise to protect Ethan, to build a life where he felt loved and valued, regardless of anyone else's approval. That evening, I felt a strange mix of sadness and empowerment. I mourned the family I had hoped for, but at the same time, I felt the first spark of independence and strength. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I also knew I could face it head-on. Their rejection had revealed the truth, and now it was my turn to take control, not just for myself, but for Ethan's future. After realizing I couldn't count on anyone in my family, a fire ignited inside me. I made a firm decision. I would never put myself or Ethan in a position where we depended on Martha, Richard, or even Hannah again. Their lack of care had opened my eyes, and I refused to let it happen twice. I started going through old memories, jotting down every moment they had let me down. I remembered birthday parties they ignored, school events they skipped, and countless times their words had made me feel small. I even noted how often they had dismissed Ethan, criticizing his behavior or ignoring his needs. Each entry stung, but it also gave me clarity. Their selfishness wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a pattern, and I needed to protect my son from it. From there, I began planning carefully. I explored ways to ensure Ethan's well-being wouldn't be at the mercy of people who didn't care. I researched childcare options, emergency plans, and ways to secure our home and routines. I started thinking about long-term security, saving more diligently, and making decisions that guaranteed Ethan's life wouldn't ever be disrupted by anyone's neglect again. The idea of revenge wasn't about revenge in a cruel sense. It was about empowerment. I wanted them to realize, in their own way, that their mistreatment wouldn't break me or Ethan. Every step I took, from strengthening our life to documenting their behavior, felt like reclaiming control they had tried to take away. Late at night, as Ethan slept peacefully in his crib, I whispered to myself, if they hurt my son, they'll regret ever crossing me. That promise became my anchor, motivating me to act decisively and protectively. It wasn't about anger alone. It was about proving that I could rise above their betrayal, keeping Ethan safe and thriving, while they remained powerless to affect our lives. From that moment on, every decision I made, every plan I put into action, carried that determination. Their cruelty had sparked something in me, a strength I hadn't fully recognized before. I knew the road ahead would take effort, patience, and resilience, but I was ready. Ethan's happiness and security became my mission, and I vowed that nothing, not even my own family, would ever jeopardize it again. Determined to secure a stable life for Ethan, I poured myself into my work at a small marketing firm. I wanted to prove that I could handle everything on my own, so I asked my boss for more responsibility, aiming for a promotion that would provide financial security and independence. It wasn't easy balancing long hours with caring for Ethan, but the thought of building a life free from my parents' interference pushed me forward. I also began searching for a new place to live, somewhere safe and peaceful, far from the constant judgment of Martha and Richard. When I found a modest home in a quiet neighborhood, I knew it was perfect. Moving Ethan into a home where he could play, explore, and grow without fear or criticism felt like reclaiming our freedom. The change in environment brought a sense of relief I hadn't expected. To ensure Ethan thrived, I enrolled him in a preschool with nurturing teachers and a curriculum that challenged him in the best ways. I signed him up for music classes and sports, giving him opportunities to learn, socialize, and gain confidence. Seeing him blossom in these activities reminded me why it was so important to stand strong and independent. Every time he smiled proudly after a small accomplishment, I felt a quiet victory for both of us. The more I invested in building our life, the clearer it became. My independence was my revenge. While my parents continued living in their narrow, judgmental world, I was creating something meaningful and lasting. I no longer needed their approval or involvement. Their absence no longer left a void. Instead, it made space for growth, love, and achievement. With each milestone Ethan reached, I felt my strength solidify. The promotion, the new home, and his happiness all stood as proof that I could succeed without anyone's support but my own. I had transformed my frustration and hurt into determination and action. Their refusal to help us had fueled a resolve that was now shaping a life full of opportunity and security. In these moments, I realized that thriving independently was far more satisfying than any confrontation or argument. While my parents watched from the sidelines, indifferent or critical, we were moving forward, creating a life where Ethan could flourish and I could feel proud of everything we had accomplished together. My independence wasn't just survival, it was the ultimate statement that their cruelty could no longer define us. A few months into our new routine, I decided to casually let my parents know about the changes in our lives. Over a phone call, I mentioned the promotion I had earned, the new house we had moved into, and how well Ethan was doing in school and his activities. I wanted to see their reaction, curious if they would acknowledge our progress or dismiss it as unimportant. As expected, their responses were laced with subtle mockery. Martha laughed lightly, saying, "Well, that's nice, I guess," while Richard added, "Must be exhausting handling everything on your own, huh?" The disbelief in their tone, mixed with thinly veiled sarcasm, stung more than outright criticism ever could. They weren't genuinely celebrating our achievements. They were minimizing them, making me feel small even as I was thriving. I stayed calm during the conversation, not letting my irritation show, but inside, my mind was already planning. Their attitude reminded me that no matter how much I accomplished, they wouldn't respect or support us unless they truly understood the struggle we had endured. I thought about the nights I had spent worrying over Ethan, the stress of managing work and home alone, and the betrayal of being left to fend for ourselves. A spark of determination grew stronger with every dismissive comment they made. I realized that passive updates wouldn't be enough. They needed to confront the reality they had ignored. They wouldn't take me seriously until they felt, even in the smallest way, the weight of the rejection and neglect they had caused. Hearing their laughter and disbelief, I reminded myself that our success was already the quiet revenge. Still, I knew that a more direct confrontation was coming. I didn't want it to be angry or spiteful, but deliberate and clear, showing them exactly what their absence and indifference had cost them. A family thriving without their involvement, a child confident and loved, and a woman who refused to be diminished. By the end of the call, I felt a mix of satisfaction and anticipation. While they tried to belittle our progress, I held steady, knowing that our lives were proof of resilience. The tension simmered quietly, but I welcomed it. It fueled the resolve that this family would eventually understand the depth of what they had done. They wouldn't respect our independence until they understood the struggle behind it, and I was ready to make sure that moment came. I decided it was time for a face-to-face encounter, so I invited my parents to Ethan's recital, framing it as a casual family outing. I wanted them to see him in his element, to experience a moment they had no right to miss, yet had consistently ignored. Their presence, I hoped, would reveal the contrast between their absence and the life we had built on our own. As the recital began, I noticed the small smirks and whispered comments from Martha and Richard. They rolled their eyes when Ethan stepped on stage, muttering under their breath about how loud or silly he looked. Their subtle jabs continued throughout the performance, targeting me as well, criticizing my choices quietly but pointedly. Every comment stung, reminding me of all the times they had undermined me and neglected my son. When the recital ended, I asked them to stay a moment longer, calmly leading into a conversation I had been preparing for. I spoke steadily, making sure each word landed with clarity and purpose. I described the ways they had abandoned us when we needed them most, how their dismissive words and actions had affected me and Ethan, and the ongoing impact of their toxic behavior. I didn't shout or cry. I stayed composed, letting the weight of the truth speak for itself. I saw their expressions change from smugness to surprise, then discomfort. The smirks disappeared, replaced by wide eyes and stiff posture. In that moment, I realized the power of this confrontation. I wasn't angry. I was in control, showing them the consequences of their neglect without raising my voice or resorting to dramatics. For the first time, I felt a quiet triumph. Their shock and unease were evidence that they had underestimated me, and now they were forced to face the reality they had ignored for so long. Ethan had performed beautifully, thriving despite their indifference, and I stood beside him, confident and unshaken. This was more than a confrontation. It was a psychological victory. I didn't need to punish them physically or humiliate them publicly. Simply standing firm, speaking truthfully, and witnessing their reaction was the revenge I had been building toward all along. As we left the venue, I held Ethan's hand tightly, feeling proud of both of us. This moment wasn't just about exposing their failures. It was about reclaiming my voice, protecting my son, and asserting that we would no longer be diminished by people who refused to care. Their shock was satisfying, but knowing we had created a life full of love, confidence, and independence was the ultimate victory. I knew that to truly protect Ethan, I needed more than emotional strength. I needed to secure our future legally and financially. I met with a lawyer to set up a will and establish trusts for Ethan, making sure that no one could ever interfere with his life or claim control over our resources. Every decision was made with care, ensuring that he would be safe and supported no matter what happened with my parents. At the same time, I focused on expanding my career. I negotiated further responsibilities at work, steadily increasing my income, and used my savings to purchase a small condo in a neighborhood I knew would offer safety and opportunity for. I also started making smart investments, building a financial cushion that could sustain us even if my parents tried to interfere or criticize our choices. The sense of security this brought was unlike anything I had felt before. When I shared news of these changes with Martha and Richard, the realization hit them slowly. They could no longer influence our lives, and any attempt to manipulate or undermine me was meaningless. I watched as their expressions shifted from casual indifference to frustrated disbelief, understanding at last that their control had vanished entirely. It was a quiet satisfaction, seeing them confronted with a situation where they had no power. For me, this was more than practical preparation. It was revenge in the most profound sense. I wasn't seeking to humiliate them or exact punishment. I was proving that their neglect and selfishness could no longer dictate the path of my life. Every legal document, every investment, every decision to move forward independently was a step toward reclaiming our agency and dignity. The peace I felt knowing we were untouchable by their influence was invigorating. I could focus on growth, education, and happiness without fear of intrusion. Ethan thrived, and I thrived alongside him, building a life full of opportunity and love. Their attempts to belittle or control us had become powerless, leaving me with the ultimate satisfaction. Our independence was complete, our future secure, and their manipulations no longer mattered. Through careful planning and determination, I had turned a painful betrayal into a foundation for resilience and triumph. Watching my parents realize that they could no longer impact our lives was not just empowering. It was proof that true revenge comes from rising above, building strength, and creating a life they could never touch. With our foundation secure, I turned my attention fully to Ethan's growth. I made sure he had enriching experiences at school, encouraging friendships, and hobbies that sparked his curiosity and confidence. Watching him develop his own interests and make connections brought me a deep sense of pride and relief, knowing he was thriving in an environment filled with support and care. At the same time, I began building a network of people who genuinely cared about us. Friends from work and neighbors became more than acquaintances. They became a chosen family, offering guidance, encouragement, and practical help when needed. Dinner invitations, playdates, and simple acts of kindness reminded me that family isn't always defined by blood, but by presence, love, and loyalty. Over time, I noticed a transformation within myself as well. The weight of betrayal slowly lifted, replaced by confidence and calm assurance. I realized that our happiness no longer depended on the approval or involvement of my parents. Their opinions and judgments had become inconsequential because the life I had created for Ethan and myself was meaningful, stable, and full of love. One afternoon, as Ethan showed me a drawing he had made for his new friends, I reflected quietly. True family is who shows up for you, not who shares your bloodline. The truth of that statement resonated deeply. Every friend, mentor, and supportive figure in our lives was proof that loyalty and care mattered more than heritage or expectations. Martha and Richard continued to exist in the background, occasionally trying to insert themselves into our lives with passive comments or subtle criticisms, but they were powerless to affect our daily reality. Their frustration was visible, but it no longer worried me or influenced my decisions. The anger and hurt I once carried had been replaced with clarity and purpose. Ethan laughed freely in our home, surrounded by people who valued him and encouraged his growth. I thrived alongside him, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment and emotional freedom. The journey from betrayal to healing had been difficult, but it strengthened both of us. I understood that life's greatest security comes from building a circle of trust and care, choosing who matters, and refusing to let those who hurt you hold any sway over your happiness. In this new chapter, we were not defined by absence or neglect, but by resilience, love, and the people who truly showed up. The past with my parents no longer dictated our future. Instead, we created our own path, strong, independent, and full of hope. Sitting quietly one evening, I reflected on everything that had happened, the moments of betrayal, the disappointment, and the years of being underestimated by the people who were supposed to care the most. It had been painful, but it had also shaped me into someone stronger and more determined. I realized that the choices I had made, the boundaries I had set, and the life I had built for Ethan were my way of rising above the hurt. Watching Ethan now, I saw a boy who was confident, joyful, and secure. He laughed easily, formed friendships without fear, and approached new challenges with excitement. He had grown up surrounded by love and support, free from the toxic influences that had once threatened to undermine him. His happiness was the clearest proof that every struggle, every moment of frustration, had been worth it. That night, I opened my journal and wrote a simple note. I forgave not for them, but for me and Ethan. It wasn't about excusing their behavior or forgetting the pain. It was about releasing the hold that anger and resentment could have over our lives. Forgiveness in this sense wasn't weakness. It was clarity, a way to move forward without carrying their toxicity with us. As I closed the journal, I felt a sense of completion. My revenge hadn't been about confrontation, punishment, or public shaming. It had been about creating a life where Ethan and I could thrive, independent of anyone who had failed to care for us. That was the kind of justice that mattered, quiet, steady, and lasting. Looking back, I understood that the ultimate victory came not from seeing them suffer, but from our own growth and resilience. I had protected my son, built a secure future, and proven that we didn't need anyone else's approval to succeed. Our happiness, stability, and confidence were the most powerful statements I could make. In that stillness, I felt peace. The chapters of betrayal had closed, replaced by a life filled with love, strength, and independence. Ethan's laughter echoed through our home, and I knew that the life we had fought to create was our triumph. True revenge had been achieved not through anger or retaliation, but through thriving, protecting what mattered most, and ensuring that the past could no longer dictate our future. Do you think I did the right thing by cutting ties with my parents, or should I have tried to give them another chance? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe and hit the bell for more stories.